It says it's being recorded. Okay, even though there are a few more people expected, this is fine. I really look forward to this. I usually start this workshop out by mentioning that we also have the Heritage Awards nominations also announced. Don't forget if you know of a wonderful leader or an excellent project. And those awards will not be held in person this year. And I think you're relieved to hear that, right? But we'll figure out a way to have an awards ceremony. So welcome everybody. Some of you are new. And remember that the rules have changed this year. And if you've read the materials, you know that there are two options. And I'm going to go through both. And some of the actual MHAA grant rules have changed. So we'll see that too. So I'm going to try to share my screen. It says that you disabled screen sharing, Jody. Try again. Okay. Oh, it just went backwards one. I like my first slide. Okay. So, Jody, you can let me know through the chat or by waving your arms or something to stop me if there's something gone wrong. But otherwise, are we systems go? Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody to the 2020 mini grant workshop. And it is being recorded. And so then we would share this recording on our YouTube channel afterwards. But I thought with this first slide, I would put our email right on this slide so you don't have to watch all the way to the end if you're watching the recording to see what our email is. So I wanted to start with one of the biggest questions, which is your project eligible? So if you're talking about a project for the heritage area project funding, it needs to be within the boundaries of the heritage area or the majority of the project. More than half of the activity should be in the heritage area. So that's kind of splitting hairs. But your organization does not have to be within the heritage area for the project grant. And that's different for the emergency operating grant. But for the project grant, the project should be within the boundaries or the majority of the project activity should be in the boundaries. So just to recap, this fall 2020 is our fiscal year 21 mini grant opportunity. The due date is October 2nd, and we usually say we'll notify you. This is our goal, to notify you by Halloween. So I looked at the nearest workday, that's November 2nd, but you can just think Halloween. Now, if by any reason we did not give out all the grant funds in the fall, we could have a spring grant round. But if someone received a grant in the fall, they're not eligible to get the part of the remainder of the funding in the spring, because that's the same pot, the fiscal year 21 funds. So to go over this mini grant opportunity, you can request up to $5,000 for all projects. What you need to have is a dollar for dollar match. So this is the big shock. You're waiting for me to say something about 75% cash match, and that's not true anymore. It just has to be a dollar for dollar match, whether it's cash or in kind. So your final project amount, your total grant, needs to be double the grant request. So if you're asking us for $2,000, your project has to be at least $4,000. So that's your rule of thumb. The upper limit for requests has been $5,000 now for a couple years, but in order for us to give out the money to cover as many quality application projects as possible, we don't usually give out 5,000. Your grant request will be carefully considered for impact and reach. Partial funding is always an option, and it has usually been the case for the past couple years, and it's very likely this year. So for your part one, now, so is that you? You might want to mute.
No, it's not me.
Okay, because there's background noise from somebody. For part
Nobody
one.
here. No one here but me.
Okay. So this is part one of the application, is the conventional non-capital project grants. And I will go through the part two also, which is the emergency operating fund grants. So, of course, I want you to visit our website. And our website has a flaw when it comes to the grants page. It has these two tabs. One says MHAA grants and one says mini grants. But the mini grants tab is almost invisible. That's why I have the big blue arrow here. So you need to look for that other tab to switch to the mini grants page. And then you'll see this page, which describes the mini grant program. It has the application and guidelines, and it has more information at the bottom of the page. So what I want to do is save you heartache and distress. Double check before you start writing. So the process for you should be to download and read the application and the guidelines. Make sure your project is eligible. Make sure your match comes from non-state sources. If you're a veteran with us, if you're a veteran, you know that the match cannot be from state sources. Then the grant funds are reimbursed only. You expend all of the costs, and then you ask, you demonstrate to us that you've spent everything, and you ask us for the remittal check. So you've spent everything, and then you get the remittal check from us. So double check, do you have the funds required to complete the project? And we always say this, please call our office. But don't call the office number there. Call my cell phone, because I'm rarely sitting in the office. And so I do put my cell phone at the end of this presentation, but I'll dictate it to you now. 410-627-6018. And so you'll want to do that to discuss your project before submitting. I try my hardest to be helpful and to point things out and to talk out loud. So it's important that you do kind of go through the pluses and minuses with me. So there are 4 stages of a grant project, and I'm going to go through all 4. So the right way to plan. The right way is to study, be sure, be absolutely confident. What will it take to complete this project? The wrong way is to say, well, I want to get 5,000, so I'm going to fill out a budget that demonstrates $5,000. You'll hear me talking throughout this presentation that if you really understand your project, you know what each line item costs, and it's justifiable. And you even probably have estimates. So what we ask you to do is to be really clear on what will it take for this project rather than asking for the full amount. So we do look at this. Is each line item in your budget necessary? Is each line item characteristic mentioned in the narrative, and does it have estimates? Or are there line items included in your budget with no supporting documentation? Well, that's not good. So the right way to plan is let me see all those line items mentioned in your narrative and have them all be necessary to the project and be supported by some kind of estimate. Even if it's just a written thing, like estimate was developed by talking to our close consultant or a board member who works in this field, something like that. So what do the reviewers talk about? So put yourselves in our seats as you plan to write this application. It's like an investment in you. What is the return? If we invest in you, what will we see as a return, a benefit? What need does the project fill? Does it meet our mission for rivers? Does it fit our criteria? Are there clear steps described that create or measure success? And is the applicant organization strong, involved, and informed? We kind of, our heritage community, we know one another, right? Put your thumbs up. We do. So we know if your organization is strong, involved, and informed in this community. The age-old question, how much should I explain? You should really be reading your answers to make sure they're clear. Reviewers are not necessarily in the same field as you or have read through a project that's like yours. Assume reviewers are not familiar with your type of project and tell them what they don't know, especially about your organization. Don't assume that we know the ins and outs of why you need this project. Explain them. So in the planning and writing, I want you to start planning the right way. Think about it really carefully. You're going to be frugal with our money, right? That's part of the why would we invest in you. Make sure your project's approved by your board. Talk to us, Four Rivers staff. You'll be writing your application and filling out the budget, and I do offer reviewing your draft before it's due. So I don't mean the day before. I might happen to be busy the day before. Talk to me during that final week or even prior if you have your review written. Don't send me an application that isn't fully filled out. Like if you haven't gotten to the budget or questions 4 and 5, because what I'm going to say to you is questions 4 and 5 are here. You know, so have me read a draft that is fully thought out. Then you're going to assemble the documents that are required as back matter. And of course, you're going to proofread it before you send it on. So you're going to write that project description, and you're going to fill a lot of things into that one paragraph. You're going to explain how the project fulfills your mission, who is served, how will it make a difference in the community? Is it a new program or an expanded program? I don't know why you're asking us for money if it's a repeated program. It would be new, or it would be something's new about it, expanded. Are you collaborating with other organizations? Because that's always a plus. Are you explaining who it is that provides your technical expertise? And just now, as I'm describing this, I'm thinking about TED, your application. You are not the applicant. The nonprofit is the applicant, and they're going to be the applicant in partnership with you. So I do hope that you explain both, you know, the nitty-gritty about the applicant organization, but also the nitty-gritty about your organization. So, measurable results. What is your desired outcome? And if you've written other grant applications, you know that you need to come up with something like this. Explain the desired outcome and how will you measure that you've met those goals. So we can talk through it out loud if you're not accustomed to writing this, but is your desired outcome greater attendance, you know, new audience, aware of you, something like this, then you will just describe in numbers how you will measure that you have met your goals. This last bullet is something I want you all to be aware of because we are aware of it when we're reading these applications. Say that we get more applications that would be more money than we have. So now we have to make some decisions. So we're looking at your budget and we're asking, is that expenditure reasonable given the number of people served and the outcomes expected? If there's only going to be 25 people served, I'm just throwing out an absurd example. Say you want us to invest $4,000 and you're only serving 25 people. Obviously, that's not a reasonable expenditure. You're going to actually think about the number served and the outcomes expected. As you build your budget, if you're not familiar with the kind of budget that has rows, which are line items, and columns, which is funding sources, I'm going to show you one in a minute. You can distinguish between cash and in kind for the sake of the clarity of the budget. Volunteer hours are part of your in kind. Of course, you're going to understand that match requirement. You're not going to show us a budget that doesn't have at least one-to-one match. We expect you to use industry standards for your staff time and your costs. So our question to you as you're building this, have you done your homework and collected your estimates? And as I always explain, I used to have an entire slide about this. Your organization should be asking us out of a pressing need that you can't afford yourself. That's why you're coming for a grant. Well, if this is a pressing need, you've looked into it and you know how much it costs. You know by doing your homework what it's going to take to fulfill this pressing need. So as we look at your budget, we're going to question, are all the items essential and the costs reasonable? And of course, have you double checked the math? And we all do this. We change just one cell in a matrix, right? And it doesn't automatically change the totals, but there are always people on a review committee that's their favorite thing to do, is to add up and see if the math adds. So I'm showing you here an example of a project budget. So if you can see the line items, interpretive planning consultant, research assistant, volunteer exhibit assistants, board committee at planning and oversight, exhibit fabrication and installation, those are the line items. And then your columns are for Rivers grant funds, match. And so for clarity, you can show us cash match and an in-kind match, but it's no longer required to have 75% cash match. I bet a lot of projects need at least 75% cash match. You can't really accomplish a whole lot for a lot of kinds of projects with just in kind. But then your final column is going to be your total project costs, and everything is going to add up both ways. In terms of this in-kind volunteer hours, there's oftentimes volunteers on a project, and then there's volunteer hours which represent the committee oversight. And I talk to people and I say, you automatically have some amount of money because of committee planning and oversight. So there is a Maryland volunteer rate, which you can, I don't have it off the top of my head. I put in 25 hours to be a round number. It's at least 25 hours, and you would Google Maryland. I think I put it in the actual application. So it's around $25 an hour for any unskilled regular volunteer that's helping you. So I'm going to go on to the next slide about the schedule of work. All activities in the schedule of work, all activities covered by this grant can't start now. They start after the grant notification date. That's November 2nd or whatever day I call you. Maybe it's October 30th, I don't know. whatever day I call you and say, you can start spending as of today, then you can count those hours. You can't count planning hours prior to the notification date, and you can't count expenses prior to the notification date. And this is not the same for part 2, the emergency operating grant. This is true for the project grant. We'll get there in a few minutes. So that's your schedule of work. What Four Rivers looks for. Well, these are some of the things we talk about. It should be a great project, well designed, a clear application with an appropriate budget. It should reflect a compelling need. It needs to have heritage tourism value. Remember, that's what MHAA funds are all about, heritage tourism value. If you don't really have heritage tourism value, maybe you're looking for another grant pot, but Maryland Heritage Areas Authority are about heritage tourism value. We are looking for partnerships. That's a real plus. That's like something in our rubric where we say, does it include partnerships? You need to reference our management plan and or our 5-year plan. And we also look and assess your organization's capacity to complete the project. So there are some must-dos. One of them is go to our website and look at our documents. And that will be a little bit more detail in the next slide. Of course, you must have someone else other than you proofread it. You'd be surprised. And they'll do the math. They'll show you all those things. Then your support documents, which include your mission statement, your list of who's on your board, your proof of the nonprofit status. You're going to scan those, so you'll have a scanned document. Your director or your chair, whoever has the legal authority, signs the original copy. And Ted, in your case, that's the person at the applicant organization has to sign that original copy. Then you send that Word document that you've been filling out as the application and your support scan to our email by midnight on October 2nd. But you mail the signed original to our office. And that's our address. You can look it up on our website anywhere. It's the Arundel Center, 44 Calvert Street, Annapolis, Maryland, 21401. I don't advise that you try to drop in because my building is sometimes like Fort Knox because it's not open to the public. You can try to coordinate with me somehow to get the signed original to me and just call me and try to describe that. So where on the website should you be looking? Aha. So do you see this link, fourriversheritage.org, under partners, then under resources? If you ever can't find this, just use the search button. The search button looks like a little magnifying glass. But if you do go there, this is where you'll see our management plan. And what we almost always expect you to do is look at number 3.0, interpretive framework. Do you see that? That can download just as a PDF. And that includes our interpretive themes. So you want to put your project within the context of our interpretive themes. I didn't get a couple more screenshots for you, but if you were to just scroll down on this page, you would see our annual plan and then you would see our 5-year plan if you want to try to reference those. The more you look, the more you understand that we have 3 major goals and we have sub goals. But one of the most important things we want you to do is take note of how your project fits within our interpretive framework. So what makes your project compelling and convincing? Of course, it's that it's such a compelling need that you've fully thought it out. You've done the necessary research. It addresses a true need, and that comes through. And your project demonstrates impact and reach. So again, that if you are only going to reach 25 people, that doesn't seem like a lot of reach. What is the impact that your project is going to have in our community? So we do have some things that are a plus. The big one is more than one-to-one match. So if you're asking us to contribute $2,500, but the NOAA or some major federal institution is contributing $100,000, that's a major plus. But even if it's just that you put together a project and you have some people supporting this, some people supporting this, some people supporting this, and our $2,000 is going to match a lot more, then that is great leverage for us. We also, if you are describing that what this project is going to achieve is going to take your organization to the next level, that's the kind of wording you want to use. Your organization needs this project to get to the next level, whatever that is. We also look at, does your organization have a successful track record? And this last thing is always a plus, to explain that you actually have a master plan and this project fits within a master plan. And it doesn't have to be called master plan. It could be called strategic plan of 2020 or planning document created within the past 6 months. But if this is always a plus, if you've got a overall view for your organization and this project fits within it. So I do always have to go through these, this is really rules, but they're called best practices. The grant money does not pay for your staff. It pays for a consultant kind of person, but not your staff. Staff time can be counted for your cash match, but of course that's only time solely dedicated to this project. Remember, these are very small projects. The staff time that goes in your staff time column, if you're counting staff time, is going to be time solely dedicated to this project. And a reminder, board members cannot be paid for their work or for their services, not even as a consultant. And that's why you give us your board list, so that we make sure that you're not utilizing a board member as a paid consultant. So this one final thing about board members, if they have a special expertise related to your project and they're donating their expertise at their professional rate, they have provided you with a document, it can be an invoice, that states their professional rate and the hours or amount they are donating. And you can attach that to your application to support it. In other words, they can donate their time. If they're an architect and they usually make $150 an hour, they can donate that. They're going to provide you with a letter that says, I am donating this amount pro bono. So these next slides are pretty quick because this is our approval process. We review it. We tell you whether your grant is approved or not approved or partial funding. When I call you or email you and say you have been approved, spending can begin then. I do draw up a grant agreement, and it's usually one of the busiest 2 weeks of the year. You're not going to get it right after I call you. I'm going to give you a fair warning that it usually takes me 3 weeks to write those grant agreements, because we're going to be doing the awards and who knows what else. So you will get a grant agreement. We are good for the money. The grant agreement is a legal document. You read it and you note the requirements that are in it. You sign 2 copies and you return both copies to me, and that's got to be, again, by mail. You'll receive your executed copy back. So after I execute it by providing the second signature, you'll get your copy and I'll keep my copy. We'll both have this legal document in our files. So then you start doing your project. You begin your activities and spending. You keep track of your expenditures. You keep track of your staff and volunteer time. And about whatever you think is your halfway point, you think about letting me know how you're doing. If I haven't heard a peep out of you, I'm going to wonder whether you're doing your project. So you might want to, and this is by email, check in with me. So there are always changes. There are always changes in your time frame. There might be changes in the activities. There might be changes in the budget. So you call, usually. You can email, but you say, my project is not as extensive, or my project is more extensive, or my project is going to take 6 months longer. And I say, that's not a problem at all. I am now going to write you an email that says, I just received your message, and I understand that the project has changed, and here are the changes I've approved. So it's easy to make an adjustment. Don't be ashamed. Don't forget to call. Then now you're going to include both the Four Rivers logo and the MHAA logo when you acknowledge us. And of course, if you have an opening, I don't know if you'll have an in-person opening, but you'll put our logos on the appropriate place. So how do you get the money at the end? Well, sometimes people look at the grant agreement and they realize they didn't do something that was required. You shouldn't wait. Remember the requirements in your grant agreement. Give us credit, use our logos, invite us, make sure your credit to us is included. There is a final report form. You download that and fill it out, and now there's a actual budget. You had your original budget and now you have an actual budget. So there are going to be copies of all your invoices and receipts that you're just going to scan and send to me as proof that you've had the expenditures. And of course, you can include the documentation of volunteer time. One of the easiest ways to do that is just in an Excel spreadsheet. Say it's meetings. I do it for meetings. There's a column for every meeting, and then there's a row for every person. And if the meeting was 2 hours, there's a 2 for that person for that meeting. That's an easy way to keep track of volunteer time if it reflects meetings. Here is an example of the least you should do. Least. You should do a nicer job than this. But do you see that this person, years ago, this is a really old piece of documentation. They wrote the line item on the photocopy. Printing was one line item, advertising was one item, supplies was one line item, and they add it up for me, and they write it, they highlight it in yellow, and if it's complicated, they write it out in blue. So you wouldn't believe, I guess, the number of times we get confusing invoices, and I give them to my assistant and I say, see if you can make any sense out of these. But don't make us guess which line item it's supposed to be. You can just clump all the line items that are printing together, clump all the line items that have to do with supplies, things like that. And don't highlight the ones that are also on the receipt but aren't included. Make it as easy for us as possible. But it should at least look like this. See how messy this is? But I was able to figure this out, no problem. So you also have to create an invoice with your final report form that says, please remit the amount of the grant to my organization at this address. Because I use that to cut the check. So you send both the invoice and the final report form and all of the documentation that represents the receipts. And you scan them all. Don't give me original receipts, please. And you send all of that to me. And so I sit down and figure out that you do have documentation for all of your expenses. I read your report. I'm proud of you of how big the reach was. And I actually make note of that for my funder, okay? Then your check needs a second signature, so I get the treasurer to sign it, and then you get your check. We can turn these around pretty fast. So that concludes the project grant, and that's the part we're all familiar with. I'm going to go through part 2 really quickly because it's different. This is only offered this year, only this year. These are the operating costs that are eligible for emergency operating funds. Costs associated with the COVID-19 state of emergency anytime after July 9th and up to 90 days after the end of the state of emergency. July 9th is the date that those funds were awarded to me. So
August, September, October.
it doesn't have to be as of the day I notify you. This is different. So say I'm only awarding you $2,000 emergency operating funds, and you already spent $2,000 since July 9th. You're done. If I did award you that and you've already spent it, you're done. You don't have to wait. If you haven't spent it, go to the final date that you explain that you're going to be closing the grant. But this is the window of these emergency funds that are available. This rule was created by MHAA, not me. So any expenses that allow your organization to continue operations and safeguard heritage resources during and after the pandemic, including but not limited to staff salaries, utilities, insurance, contractor services, rent, mortgage payments. It could be others. So your eligibility, this is different also. The nonprofit partner has to be located within the heritage area boundaries. And my board stipulated that it also has to have a track record of engagement with us, with Four Rivers. So that's who's eligible for the emergency operating funds. So I've adapted questions that I've taken from reputable, similar emergency operating grant applications, answer all of them to the best of your ability. And then the rest of the advice is similar as to part 1. It's a very competitive process. It will be a very rigorous review. We're going to be wondering if you're close to our mission and your own mission. Are you consistent with Four Rivers priorities, goals, and interpretive themes? But your costs don't have to reflect something that's a project. Your cost can be emergency operating. You will create a budget that also has line items in rows and columns for Four Rivers funds and match funds in total. So here's an example. It might not be that visible, but so I wrote out contract wages for an office manager because you're allowed to cover staff. So there's the mini grant column, the match column, and the total column. Then I just made up, do you need to cover utilities, electricity for your site for 1 month, case of sanitizer at whatever cost per case. These are examples of emergency operating funds that you can include in your budget. And of course, please check your math. Again, all of the other rules are the same. Look at our documents, scan your support documents, your director or chair signs the original copy, and so forth. The approval process is the same. It will be a grant agreement that's a legal document. You get the money, it's the same way. My website doesn't currently have this kind of final report form, but I already have that written because I've already had a few examples of emergency operating mini grants. So I will post that. So it's a different final report form. You will download the right one. And then in terms of your receipts, you're also going to explain the expenditures that were made. And I'm ready for your questions. And I think there were a bunch, so I'm going to look here. Jody, you're not one of the people on my screen. Oh, there you are. Do you see any questions for me now? I also just recommend, that's my cell phone, that's the email. If you have the other email, which is pzben00, I also get that one. Jody, are there questions that came in the chat? Oh, okay. So let's see how much time this took. Yay, not really.
Hi,
that long.
Carol. Carol, I have a question. I didn't type it in the chat though.
Okay.
I wanted to know, going back to the project grant, do you happen to have a sample to share with us, or it may have already been shared, of a grant that has been awarded as a sample to share with the group?
I don't post one like that. They are often all over the place. And you know what MHAA does? They say, so-and-so had a similar project to yours,
Mm-hmm.
but you should ask them if they're willing to share it.
Okay.
Because that's very simple. Like Captain Avery Museum, remember that project grants are never capital. They're always non-capital.
Right.
But say it was, well, so many people do brochures or whatever, but we could talk about the extent of it. But maybe you have a special project in mind, and I would just suggest that so-and-so recently did that. And if you have any questions or want to see an excellent example, you would ask them if they're willing to share.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. See, everybody be as forward as Pam. If you got a question, just jump in, because that chat thing might not be. Let's see, is there something in chat? Okay, so Lauren was sharing the volunteer rate. She says, wow, is that true? Maryland is up to $29.51. If it says it on that website, it's true. So every volunteer hour, even if they're not a professional, they're just one of your volunteers, you can count them for $29.51 of support. And Nelson wants to know, can she apply for both? No. And the application is really clear. Fill out either part 1 or part 2. Is anyone contemplating? I did get a call from somebody that wasn't sure. Their organization, their board was debating whether they should ask for emergency operating grant funds, or they also had an excellent project. So I always support all projects, and I try to say rah rah, and this sounds really great. I don't know where the reviewers will come down on it. Oftentimes they're not exactly the same viewpoint as me. I do not know how many requests we're going to have this year, and we do kind of expect that we might get slammed. Okay, well, if you don't want to ask a question in front of everyone, you can just call or email, and I really appreciate it. So again, like, I am not experienced in doing these emergency operating funds. We were allowed to convert last fiscal year. We allowed applicants to convert mini grants to emergency grants, but they had already received a grant award. So we'll be going through this carefully, because if you're telling me you have need, I believe it. And I do encourage you, if you are going for emergency operating, that's a good reason to give me a call and explain how pinched you are, where your organization is in terms of struggling. So I was just explaining to someone on the phone, like, almost everybody might have been planning to pay for their utilities through the winter or something like that from the fundraisers that you usually have in the summer and fall. That seems really true to all of us. All of you probably have canceled fundraisers and have not at all made up the difference. So that's part of that application. In part 2 is to explain your lack of your usual sources of funds. But that's great. I don't have to keep talking. If there are no more questions, I thank you very much. And I look forward to supporting your applications. Remember, I'm trying to get you all funded. So that's why we talk out loud when you call. I try to say, but if you put it this way. So best of luck, especially if I see you on this call or if you've talked to me, I'm going to expect to see your application on October 2nd. So you might want to drop me a line if you're not going to apply. And you say, we decided not to. But thank you. Have a great day and a great rest of your week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.